Chapter 1. The Ghost at Greystone Manor. It was the first Sunday of October when death arrived at Greystone Manor. A death as elegant and peculiar as the house itself. The estate belonged to Lady Eugenia Willoughby, a widow of austere grace and immense fortune. Greystone was her ancestral home, nestled in the Cotswolds, with gabled rooftops, ivy-covered turrets, and a history of quiet scandals whispered behind lace-draped windows. It was during her annual autumn house party, an event carefully curated, with nobles, socialites, and 2 ex-ambassadors, that something uninvited took place. On the morning of October 5th, the housemaid Martha discovered the body. Sir Alistair Rivington, an eccentric yet charming man of letters, was found seated unnaturally upright in the leather armchair of the drawing-room, his untouched whisky beside him, and an expression of faint amusement frozen on his face. At first glance, one might have thought he had merely dozed off after too much brandy, but the dark bruising at his temple, coupled with the overturned antique globe and a faint trail of blood on the mahogany floor, told another story. No weapon was found. No one had heard a scream. The windows were bolted from the inside, and only 7 guests had stayed the night. The manor had been locked, and every key accounted for. Yet someone had killed Sir Alistair. Lady Eugenia's voice trembled as she repeated the words to the constable. He wasn't even supposed to be here. He said he would leave after dinner, but he never left. The newspapers were quick to seize on the poetic horror of it all. A guest who refused to leave. Murder most aristocratic at Greystone Manor. Within a day, Chief Inspector Garrow of the local constabulary had formed his theory. A simple one involving a jealous lover, an old debt, or perhaps a drunken quarrel. But when inconsistencies arose in the timeline of the night, and whispers began to circulate about the host's missing pearl brooch and an unsigned will found in Sir Alistair's pocket, Lady Eugenia sent a discreet telegram to London. It read simply, Hercule Poirot, your presence is required at Greystone Manor. A guest overstayed permanently. Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. Word count 2,500 at Greystone Manor, for all its opulence and whispered secrets, had never been so quiet. The drawing-room, once the site of spirited debates, piano recitals, and laughter muffled behind port and cigars, now stood sealed off behind heavy oak doors, guarded by a uniformed constable. The party was over, but the guests could not leave. Not yet. They sat now in the sunlit conservatory, each in varying degrees of discomfort, all watched over by the impeccable eye of Lady Eugenia Willoughby. She had taken to the situation with a cold, almost theatrical grace. Her thin fingers, adorned with rings of emerald and jet, clutched a lace handkerchief with a grip that belied her age. "They will be arriving any moment," she announced, her tone clipped. "Monsieur Poirot and his associate. Until then, I expect you all to remain civil." The eyes of the house party shifted. Suspicion was already seeping through the walls like a winter draught. 7 guests had stayed that night. 1 was dead, which meant by Poirot's calculations, as he would later say, 6 potential murderers, unless one of them was lying about their stay. But for now, let us meet them. Lady Eugenia Willoughby. The hostess, a widow of 2 decades, Lady Eugenia had presided over Greystone like a queen in semi-retirement. Her late husband, Lord Lionel Willoughby, had been a shipping magnate and an art collector. Since his death, she had managed her affairs with dignified control, throwing only one house party per year, always in early autumn. She had invited Sir Alister Rivington, the deceased, on a whim. He was charming at dinner parties, she later said, but dreadfully fond of gossip. What she didn't say was that Alistair had once threatened to publish a memoir that included stories about her late husband's dealings in Shanghai. Colonel Archibald Stroud, the soldier 58, sharp-moustached and full of anecdotes about the Sudan and Mesopotamia. Colonel Stroud wore his uniform even in retirement. He had known Sir Alistair for decades. We served on the same diplomatic council in Bombay. He told the inspector the morning after the murder. The man was clever, but not trustworthy. He had a drinking problem, a temper that flared with little provocation, and an unpaid gambling debt. One Sir Alistair might have mentioned over brandy the night before his death. Cicely Penrose, the heiress with cropped auburn hair and a gaze that could either seduce or destroy. Cicely Penrose was the niece of Lady Eugenia, a flapper by temperament and fortune hunter by reputation. Cicely had been engaged twice and abandoned both men at the altar. Sir Alistair had, once upon a time, courted her. He had also written a short story based suspiciously on her that had been published under a pseudonym in the Strand. Cicely claimed she had forgiven him, but her smile when she said it was thinner than a knife's edge. Mr. Julian Forrest, the secretary, pale, bespectacled, and always clutching a folder or a notebook. Julian Forrest had served as Sir Alister's personal secretary for the last 6 years. He managed correspondence, scheduled lectures, and ghost-wrote the occasional column. He had not been invited to the party. Lady Eugenia had made that quite clear. "I insisted he stay the night," Sir Alister had said over dinner. "He's frightfully nervous, and the rain was frightfully inconvenient." Julian had only a thin suitcase and a battered typewriter with him. According to the constable, his room was locked from the inside when the body was found. A useful alibi, or a very convenient one. Dr. Beatrice Malvern, the psychologist, in her late 30s, stylish but unassuming. Dr. Malvern was the sort of woman who observed more than she spoke. She had recently returned from Vienna, where she had studied under a student of Freud. Her presence at the party had raised a few eyebrows. Why, after all, had Lady Eugenia invited someone so modern and academic? Eugenia wanted something new this year, she explained with a shrug. A conversation partner. I'm afraid I mostly disappointed her. Dr. Malvern had spoken at length with Sir Alistair the night before his death. They had argued over the implications of childhood trauma on criminal behavior. According to the butler, their voices had grown heated. Madame Lavinia Dupont, the clairvoyant figure of mystery and melodrama. Madame Dupont had been a guest at Greystone once before, and then never invited back until this year. She claimed to have been summoned by the energy of the house, and had made several vague predictions during the weekend, including, "Someone here walks in death's shadow, and a storm is coming that no roof can keep out." She wore veils even indoors, and carried a vial of lavender oil she used to protect her aura. Sir Alister had mocked her mercilessly at dinner. She had cursed him back, though later claimed it had only been metaphorical. Mr. Lionel March, the artist, a quiet, soulful man of 34. Lionel March had been commissioned to paint a new portrait of Lady Eugenia. He had stayed at the manor for the last 3 weeks, setting up a studio in the West Wing. No one quite knew what his connection to the deceased was, but he was one of the few guests who claimed not to have spoken to Sir Alister at all. "I found him exhausting," Lionel said softly. "The kind of man who tries to look into your soul and sells what he sees. He had painted Sir Alister's portrait once, years ago, and destroyed it afterward." The arrival of Hercule Poirot was just past noon when the Rolls-Royce swept through the iron gates of Greystone Manor. Poirot emerged first, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit, his moustache perfectly waxed, his patent leather shoes gleaming. Beside him, Captain Hastings stepped out, blinking at the early autumn sun. "Not quite what I expected," Hastings murmured, eyeing the ivy-covered facade. Poirot adjusted his hat. "Ah, but that is precisely the point, mon ami. The charming country house, the polite aristocrats sipping tea, all a lovely disguise. And beneath, perhaps, une tragédie." They were met by Lady Eugenia herself, who wasted no time in ushering them inside. Poirot bowed. "Madame, I offer my condolences. May I view the body?" "It has not been moved," she said stiffly. "Inspector Garrow insisted." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Bon, we shall begin there. First impressions and first contradictions." The drawing-room, preserved like a snapshot of that fatal night, spoke volumes. The decanter was untouched. The armchair was still out of place. Poirot spent nearly 20 minutes in the room. His fingers steepled, saying very little. "Curious," he finally said. "You will note, Hastings, the glass of whisky?" "Yes, what of it?" "It is placed for the left hand. Sir Alister was right-handed." Hastings frowned. "You think it was staged?" "I think, mon ami," said Poirot quietly, "that someone tried very hard to make it not look like murder." Back in the conservatory, Poirot addressed the guests. He introduced himself with gracious formality, then settled into a chair that gave him a full view of the room. "I will be speaking with each of you," he said, "not merely to establish what you know, but what you think. In the murder of a man like Sir Alister Rivington, the truth is rarely simple." Colonel Stroud gave a grunt. "You don't think it was a robbery, then?" "No," said Poirot. "There was no robbery. There was only revenge or fear, or perhaps the need to silence." A tense silence followed. "I must ask you all to remain on the estate. No one may leave." Lady Eugenia tilted her chin. "Are we suspects, monsieur?" Poirot smiled with something like pity. "Madame, everyone is a suspect, a hint of a secret." That evening, as the guests retired to their rooms, Poirot and Hastings sat beside the fire in the guest parlour. "Well," said Hastings, "they all have motive, don't they? The Colonel with his temper, that strange woman with her hexes, and Cicely, there's something odd about her." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Oui, Hastings. But do you know what intrigues me?" "What's that?" Poirot tapped his temple. "Someone is lying, but not about themselves. They are lying about someone else. A misdirection, a red herring." Hastings sat up straighter. "But who?" Poirot gave a small shrug. "That we shall discover. But tonight I will think about the whiskey glass, the missing time between midnight and 1, and the curious absence of footprints near the globe." He smiled faintly. "And of course, the guest who never left." Chapter 3. Poirot's interviews Hercule. Poirot believed in order, in patterns, in the symmetry of human behavior, and so, after a light breakfast served precisely at 8, he began his interviews not by instinct but by design, beginning with the person most likely to lie first, not to protect themselves, but to protect another. He started with Julian Forrest, the secretary. The young man looked pale and anxious as he entered the library, clutching a notebook, even though there would be no dictation today. "Please." Poirot gestured to the leather armchair across from him. "Sit, monsieur." Julian obeyed, casting a nervous glance toward the closed door. "You were not invited to the house party, n'est-ce pas?" "No," Julian admitted. "Sir Alistair insisted I accompany him. He said I was overdue for a change of scenery." Poirot studied him closely. "Did you enjoy your evening here?" "I hardly had time to enjoy anything. Sir Alistair kept me revising a draft of his next speech. He wished to address the League of Nations next month." "Did anyone see you during the night?" "I stayed in my room," Julian said quickly. "Mostly. I came downstairs once, just before midnight, to fetch some paper from the drawing-room. Sir Alistair wasn't there." "But his glass of whiskey was?" Julian hesitated. "Yes. I thought he'd just stepped out." "Did you touch anything?" "No. No, Monsieur Poirot. I was only there for a moment." Poirot gave a small nod. "Merci, Monsieur Forrest. That will be all for now." Next came Cicely Penrose, elegant and unconcerned, dressed in a sapphire blouse that brought out the sharpness of her eyes. "I suppose you think I killed him," she said, lounging in the armchair like a cat near a fire. "He was quite detestable." "Were you close?" Poirot asked delicately. "Once, a long time ago. We kissed at a railway station. Then he sold the story to a gossip column. He said it was fiction, of course." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And yet you tolerated his presence here." "Lady Eugenia asked me to behave, and I had no reason to suspect he'd bring up the past. Though I will admit, he did drop hints. Hints that he had something of mine. A letter, perhaps, or a photograph. I wouldn't be surprised if he planned to auction it." "Did he show you anything?" "No, but he promised a surprise the next morning." Cicely leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Perhaps someone didn't want that surprise to be revealed." Poirot offered a polite smile. "Merci, Mademoiselle Penrose." The third guest to be interviewed was Colonel Archibald Stroud, who entered the library with a soldier's stiffness, arms crossed behind his back. "I'll speak plainly," he said. "Alistair was a scoundrel. I didn't like him, but I didn't kill him." "Of course," Poirot said calmly. "Did you argue with him?" "Only about the Empire," Stroud grunted. "He had radical ideas about colonial reform. Dangerous ideas, but nothing worth murdering over." "You were heard raising your voice." Stroud frowned. "We were playing billiards. He accused me of cheating. I called him a liar. He called me a relic. That was that." Poirot let a moment pass. "And where were you between midnight and 1? "In my room, with a bottle of scotch and the Times. You can ask the valet. He brought it up." "And did you hear anything during the night?" Stroud hesitated, then shook his head. No, nothing. Poirot did not press him. Merci, Colonel. Madame Lavinia Dupont arrived draped in shawls, eyes outlined in kohl, the scent of patchouli preceding her like a theatrical prologue. Your aura is stormy, Monsieur Poirot, she said, eyes glittering. Do you often chase death? Often than death chases me, Poirot replied. Tell me, madam, what did you see that night? I felt a disruption, she whispered. Around midnight. I was in a trance when it came, like a ripple in the ether. Something unholy. Poirot looked unimpressed. Did you leave your room? Only once, just after 1. I walked the corridor, listening. To what? The house breathing. It speaks, you know, in creaks and sighs. The spirit of the place is wounded. Did you see anyone? No one. Not in body. But a shadow passed by the gallery. Poirot gave a courteous nod. Merci, madam. That will be all. Dr. Beatrice Malvern entered with her hands in her coat pockets, as though the murder were merely an unexpected detour in her research. You understand psychology, do you not, Doctor? Poirot asked. I understand the layers we hide beneath, she replied. Sir Alistair had many. Did you meet with him privately? Twice. He wished to discuss a particular trauma. His fear of drowning. I found it curious. The man never swam, never sailed, yet often dreamed of water. And the evening before his death, he seemed agitated, wanted to know if suppressed memories could cause hallucinations. I told him they could. Poirot tilted his head. You think he imagined something? I think he feared something. Something from the past. That's what usually kills a man like him, not the present. Poirot regarded her in silence for a moment, then gestured toward the door. Merci, Doctor. Mr. Lionel March was the last to be interviewed that day. He entered with the paint on his fingers and a quiet resignation in his step. You did not speak to Sir Alistair. No, I avoided him. We didn't part on good terms last time. Over a portrait? Lionel nodded. He commissioned me 10 years ago, then demanded I destroy it. Said it showed too much. What did it show? Something cold, predatory. I thought it was accurate. He disagreed. Poirot leaned forward. Did you see anyone the night of the murder? I was in the studio, working late. I heard voices, Sir Alistair arguing with someone. A woman, could have been Cicely or the clairvoyant. Their voices are similar. And after that, silence. Then the rain started again. Poirot tapped a finger on the desk. Merci, monsieur. That evening, Poirot and Hastings walked in the gardens, the mist thickening around the hedges. Well? Asked Hastings. What do you make of it? Poirot was silent for a time, then spoke quietly. There are too many stories, too many versions. This is not simply a question of motive. It is a matter of time, of who was where, when. You think they're covering for each other? I think, Poirot said, that someone has built a wall of lies and very carefully hidden a door in it. He paused beneath a sycamore tree. There is one more interview I must conduct. With whom? Poirot smiled faintly. The guest who wasn't on the list. Chapter 4. The Footprints by the Lake. The morning sun shimmered through a gauze of silver mist, lending Enderby Hall an ethereal quality. Yet beneath its tranquil facade, the household was coiled tight with tension. Poirot, ever immaculate, descended the stairs with his cane tapping gently, his eyes scanning every object as though the truth might be hiding in plain sight. Lady Eugenia met him in the morning room, her hands clasped tightly, the pearls around her neck slightly askew, unusual for a woman so poised. "You've spoken with everyone, Monsieur Poirot. Do you believe the killer is among us?" Poirot inclined his head. "I do, madame. It is always so in these cases. A guest, yes, but one who never truly left." Eugenia's brow furrowed. "You mean someone hiding?" "None. I mean someone whose past has made them linger. A secret that has outstayed its welcome." He stepped closer to the window, gazing across the mist-veiled grounds. "There is one thing I must see before we proceed further." "Proceed further? Where?" "The lake." The lake was a calm silver plate, disturbed only by a pair of swans drifting silently. Poirot and Hastings walked along its edge, boots damp from the dew, passing the old boathouse with its moss-covered roof. "I must say," Hastings remarked, "I don't see what use this is. The body was found in the drawing-room, not out here." "Precisely, mon ami," Poirot murmured. "And yet Sir Alister's shoes were lightly muddied, the kind of mud one would not find on the garden path, but on the shoreline of a lake." It stopped frowning. "You think he came out here before he died?" "Perhaps. Or someone lured him." Poirot stooped suddenly, brushing aside reeds with his gloved hand. He pointed at a partially obscured indentation in the soft earth. "Regardez, a footprint, more precisely several. One deep set, heavy, perhaps a man's. The other lighter, smaller. The footprints overlapped in places, circling each other, facing toward the lake, then away. And here," Poirot added, indicating a partially broken branch, "a struggle. No, more like someone losing balance." Then he straightened. They walked back toward the house. "Could the victim have met someone here before he was killed?" Hastings asked. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It is more likely someone came here to decide whether to kill him." At the house, Poirot requested the butler, Mr. Grimsby, to gather the guests once more, this time in the morning room, beneath the light of a chandelier shaped like a radiant sunburst. Each guest entered cautiously. Cicely wore a veil today, as if mourning fashionably. Colonel Stroud looked red-faced and impatient. Madame Dupont clutched her silk scarf like a relic. Julian Forrest still appeared on the edge of collapse, while Lionel March lingered near the window, sketching absently in a notebook. Dr. Beatrice Malvern stood in the corner, her gaze fixed on Poirot, as though analyzing him in return. "Mesdames, et messieurs," Poirot began, hands folded behind his back. "We are nearing the heart of the puzzle. But before the pieces can lock into place, I must ask further questions." "More interviews?" Stroud growled. "Not interviews, Colonel. Clarifications." He turned to Cicely. "You mentioned Sir Alister threatened you with a surprise letter, perhaps. Did he say when he would reveal it?" Cicely nodded slowly. "At breakfast," he said. "He raised a glass and said, 'By morning a guest will be ruined.'" There were murmurs in the room. Poirot turned to Lionel. "Monsieur March, you said you heard Sir Alister arguing with a woman. Could you be more precise about the time?" Lionel frowned. "Sometime around 11. It was raining lightly then. Poirot turned to Hastings. And the rain became heavier just after midnight, n'est-ce pas? It did, Hastings confirmed. I remember because I was reading near the window. So the argument occurred before the whisky was poured, Poirot said, half to himself. He faced the group again. One more matter. The footprints at D. The lake, one man's, one woman's. Did anyone walk there late last night? Silence. Poirot's eyes narrowed. No one. A long pause. Then Madame Dupont raised a hand, fingers trembling. I was there, she whispered. Earlier in the evening. I was walking, searching for alignment with the stars. Sir Alister followed me. He asked questions I didn't understand. About dreams, about death. I left him there. Alone? Yes, he was brooding. I thought he needed solitude. Poirot tilted his head. Did you tell anyone about this last night? No, I did not think it mattered. Poirot turned, locking eyes with Julian Forest. And you, monsieur? What did Sir Alister ask of you that evening? Julian's lips parted, but no words came. Was it about his speech? Poirot pressed. Or his will? The room froze. Julian swallowed. I wasn't supposed to say anything. But yes, he changed his will that morning. Go on. He cut someone out. Said he'd found a betrayal. He gave me a sealed envelope to post, addressed to his solicitor in London. Poirot nodded gravely. And did you post it? Julian shook his head. He was dead by morning. There was a hush. Poirot stepped away from the group and opened a small notebook. From it, he withdrew a card, one of his own calling cards, with a single word written on the back. He did not show it. Instead, he tucked it back in and closed the notebook. The killer is afraid, he said quietly. Afraid of something they forgot to hide. Then, with a final bow, Poirot turned and walked out. That evening, Poirot asked to see the valet. Which one, sir? Grimsby inquired. Poirot smiled faintly. The one who has not yet been introduced. Grimsby stiffened. I don't understand, but you do, Poirot said calmly. You simply do not wish to say it aloud. After a pause, Grimsby gave a small nod. I'll fetch him. A few minutes later, Edgar, a wiry man in his late 20s, entered the study, his uniform crisp, eyes wary. You served Sir Alister personally? Poirot asked. Yes, sir. And you remained on duty through the night? I did. Did Sir Alister leave the drawing-room after 10 o'clock? No, sir. He stayed there until someone knocked. Poirot's brows lifted. Who? I didn't see. I was in the hall. Heard voices. A woman's. Then silence. Then he asked for a fresh glass of whisky. A second glass. Yes, sir, but it was untouched. Poirot's voice was smooth. Where is it now? In the cabinet, sir, behind the crystal decanters. I didn't throw it out. I was waiting for the order. Poirot gave a slow, approving nod. Très bien, Edgar. You may go. When the valet had left, Poirot turned to Hastings. My friend, he said, we now know something most important. What's that? Poirot's eyes twinkled. The killer was not confident in the first attempt. Chapter 5. The broken watch and the burnt letter, the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, was nearly drowned out by the low murmur of voices at breakfast. The guests were subdued, more so than the day before breakfast. The guests were subdued, more so than the day before. The sudden intrusion of death had turned Enderby Hall from a place of luxury into a gilded prison. Poirot did not eat. He rarely did when the mind was engaged. Instead, he paced the room slowly, hands behind his back, head bowed, as if listening to whispers only he could hear. Across the table, Julian Forrest barely touched his food. His eyes had dark circles beneath them, and his hands trembled. Madame Dupont stirred her tea with unnatural care, each swirl echoing her internal anxiety. Cicely wore black today, more theatrical mourning than sincere. It was Lionel March who broke the silence. Has the inspector returned with news? Poirot stopped pacing. No, he said, but I believe we already possess all the facts. Only the order eludes us, and the motive. He turned to Hastings. You remember the whiskey glass, the second one, left untouched? Yes. Edgar said it was hidden in the cabinet. And do you recall that Sir Alister's wristwatch was found broken at precisely 11:42 p.m.? I do. The inspector mentioned it might have been smashed in a struggle. Poirot nodded. Mais non, mon ami. A struggle would not break a watch in such a way. The crystal was shattered cleanly. The hand stopped as if by deliberate pressure, as though it were struck against something hard, by design. You think someone staged the time of death? Exactement. Hastings frowned. But why? Turned. Create confusion, or a false alibi. You see, if everyone believes the murder occurred at 11:42, they will rely on their own whereabouts at that exact moment. But what if the murder happened later? Poirot moved toward the sideboard where the whiskey glasses were stored. From behind the decanters, he withdrew a crystal tumbler, untouched, save for a faint trace of residue. I had it tested, Poirot said softly. Not for poison, for sedatives. Everyone in the room froze. He continued. Sir Alister was not killed with a blunt object. He was poisoned, subtly. The blow to the head came after, to disguise the truth. Dr. Malvern stiffened. You're suggesting the body was moved? Poirot glanced at her. Not moved, no. But the scene was arranged. The whiskey poured, the watch broken, the fire lit to burn evidence. Cicely leaned forward. Evidence? Poirot opened a leather folder he had brought with him. From within, he pulled a charred scrap of parchment. Barely legible, its edges blackened. This was found behind the fire grate, he said. A corner of a letter. The ink faded, but the address remains. He handed it to Hastings, who read, aloud, to Messrs. Holloway and Finch Solicitors, London. Julian Forrest gasped. That was the will, he said. He asked me to post it. Poirot bowed his head. Indeed. Someone found it before it could leave the estate. They burned it. Cicely's voice was thin. Are you accusing me? No, madame. I am accusing no one yet. But I will ask this. Who knew about the change in the will? No one spoke. Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Malvern. You? No, though I suspected he might be planning one. Why? He'd asked me recently for my advice about mental capacity. Said he had reason to doubt someone's fitness to inherit. Poirot turned to Cicely. He doubted you, didn't he? Cicely's lips twitched. He doubted everyone. True, Poirot conceded, but his doubts were specific. It is not coincidence that the only portion of the will that survived was the address to his solicitors. Someone destroyed the rest, not realizing it would leave a clue. He turned back to Julian. You said he gave you the envelope to post. Did you see its contents? No, it was sealed. But you knew it was the will. I assumed it was. He said it would change everything. Poirot folded his hands. Let us assume, then, that someone intercepted the envelope, read it, and discovered they had been disinherited. Colonel Stroud scoffed. So what? Everyone here has a motive. Even you, Hastings. Did you know the man in school? Hastings flushed. Barely. Poirot interjected. Motive is only one part of the puzzle. Opportunity, timing, and the psychology of the killer. These are just as important. He turned toward the window, then pointed to the gardens. Come, there is one last place we must examine. They walked in silence through the dew-soaked grass to the back of the estate, where the gardener's shed stood, old and half-rotted. Inside was a heap of discarded tools, ropes and broken wood. Poirot stooped and picked up a boot. It was muddied, matching the print found at the lake. Mr. March, Poirot said suddenly, you sketch in your notebook, do you not? The artist nodded. May I see your drawings from the day before the murder? March hesitated. They're nothing, just impressions. Even more reason to see them. With reluctance, March handed over his notebook. Poirot flipped through. It dot landscapes, faces, the house, the lake, and on one page, dark, bold strokes depicting a man and a woman standing near the boathouse. Poirot studied it, then turned it toward the group. This was drawn before the murder? Yes, that evening, around 6. Tell me, Poirot said gently, did you know you had witnessed the final argument? March paled. I thought it was just an embrace. They were standing so close, I didn't recognize them. Poirot snapped the book shut. I did. Later that night, Poirot summoned Hastings to the library. It is time, he said. I shall reveal the killer tomorrow. You've figured it out? Poirot gave a slow nod. Yes. The killer feared exposure, feared the loss of power, of wealth, of identity. And so they struck, quietly, efficiently. But as always, they forgot one thing. What? Poirot smiled faintly. La psychologie. The mind leaves traces where the hands do not. De Peugeot. 6. The circle closes. The sun rose bleakly over Enderby Hall, its light stretched thin by a thick veil of autumn fog. The estate stood in fragile silence, as though holding its breath. Somewhere within those grand walls, a murderer still walked freely, and Hercule Poirot was ready to act. The guests, summoned once more to the drawing-room at Poirot's request, took their seats with visible reluctance. A tension crackled in the air, thick, oppressive, almost theatrical. Inspector Barnes arrived a few minutes later, having just returned from London. He looked wearied, his coat flecked with mist. Well, Poirot, he said, you've got them all gathered again. Have you solved it? Poirot adjusted his cuffs, then smoothed an imaginary wrinkle in his already immaculate waistcoat. Indeed I have, mon ami, he said softly. The time has come to expose the killer. He turned to face the room. You may be wondering why I chose not to reveal everything immediately. It is simple. A detective must wait until the moment of maximum clarity, when every falsehood has to fear been stripped away and only the truth remains. Cicely reclined in her chair, arms folded. This sounds like theatre, Monsieur Poirot. Mais non, madame. Murder is not theatre. It is the shattering of life, of trust, of natural order. And this crime, though subtle in execution, was no less brutal for it. He gestured toward Hastings, who stepped forward and handed out several typed transcripts. These, Poirot explained, are the final telephone records from Enderby Hall's main line. Inspector Barnes kindly obtained them from the exchange in town. The guests flipped through the pages. On the night of the Echet murder, Poirot continued, a call was placed at precisely 10:52 p.m. to a solicitor in London. Julian's eyes widened. Holloway and Finch. Just so. But here is the key, monsieur. That call was not made by Sir Alistair. It was made by someone else, someone impersonating him, someone desperate to confirm whether the new will had been received, or if they still had time to destroy it. Poirot turned slowly. Dr. Malvern. All eyes shot to her. She didn't flinch, but her smile was gone. You called the solicitor. You posed as Sir Alistair to ask if the document had been filed. The doctor's voice was cold. That's absurd. You were close enough to mimic his tone, and you were the only one unaccounted for at that exact time. You claimed to be reviewing medical journals in your room, but no one saw you. Inspector Barnes stepped forward. That's true, and her name's not on the guest registry for the call logs either. Only the house line shows it. Poirot pressed on. But there is more. I retrieved a second page from the burnt letter. This portion that survived under the grate's edge. It included 3 names, all beneficiaries, none of them yours. She stared at him, still defiant. You stood to inherit nothing under the new will, Poirot said softly. But under the old one, you were the primary trustee for a fund, one that would have given you control over a substantial sum. It's your responsibility I earned, she hissed. You manipulated his trust, poisoned his judgment, and when you sensed he would cut you out entirely, you acted. First with a sedative in his whiskey, then with a fire to destroy the proof. The blow, too, the head was symbolic, a final insult to disguise the method. Cicely's face was blank. Julian looked between them, stunned. Dr. Malvern rose slowly from her chair. You believe all this based on ink scraps and a whiskey glass? No, Poirot said. I believe it because of your reaction when I mentioned the will. You were the only one who did not feign surprise. And because I found a vial of sedative in your travel case, labeled as headache remedy. I had it tested. She took a breath, but said nothing. Poirot stepped back, allowing Inspector Barnes to take charge. The doctor didn't resist as the inspector approached. Her defiance had melted into an unreadable calm. As she was led away, she turned one last time. I protected him from the vultures, she said. He would have been devoured. I did what had to be done. Poirot made no reply. That evening, the drawing-room was quiet again. Hastings stood by the fire, arms crossed. You suspected her all along, didn't you? Poirot gave a half-smile. No, Hastings. I suspected everyone. But her precision, her composure, it was too much. She thought herself above error, and that is always the fatal flaw. He tacked his temple. In the end, it was the psychology that revealed her. A killer who acts out of logic forgets that emotion leaves traces. Hastings raised a brow. And the others? Poirot glanced out the window. They will recover, some quicker than others, the living always do. He reached for his coat. And now, mon ami, we leave this place. It has had its tragedy, and Hercule Poirot has done what he came to do. Chapter 7. Echoes after the year. Full the corridors of Enderby Hall, once stiff with tradition and untouched by scandal, now bore the silence of shame. Though the culprit had been named and taken, and justice was beginning its slow turning wheel, the house was far from restful. Even the grand staircase, polished daily by invisible hands, seemed to creak differently, as though mourning a disruption to its old rhythm. Poirot, however, was unperturbed. He sat by the bay window in the breakfast-room the following morning, calmly buttering toast and sipping his chocolate. Across from him, Hastings turned the pages of the local paper, already filled with snippets about the case. He glanced at Poirot over the edge of the broadsheet. "She's not even denying it anymore," Hastings muttered. "Dr. Malvern admitted to burning the new will, said it was misguided, emotional retribution. They're calling it premeditated." Poirot nodded once. "Premeditated, yes, but not impulsive. Malvern was a woman of calculation. Her emotional outburst was merely the final step in a drawn-out process. It is always so, Hastings. The slow poison of pride breeds the most carefully concealed crimes." He dabbed his mouth with a napkin, eyes twinkling faintly. "Tell me, have you noticed anything else curious about this household?" Hastings blinked. "I thought the case was over." "Mais non. The murder is solved, yes, but the human drama, it continues." Before Hastings could respond, Julian Symes entered. He looked strained, the lines under his eyes deepened by a sleepless night. He nodded at the detective, hesitating as if to speak, then shifted his gaze. "I wanted to say," he began, "thank you, Monsieur Poirot. It's unsettling, realizing you were living under the same roof as a murderer. I can't believe we missed it." Poirot studied the man for a long moment. "Sometimes, Monsieur Symes, we do not miss it. We simply choose not to see it. That is quite a different thing." Julian flinched ever so slightly. He cleared his throat. "I've decided to sell Enderby Hall. I cannot remain in a place so stained by deceit. Cicely agrees." Hastings folded his paper. Cicely? She didn't seem the type to abandon a family legacy. Julian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "No, but she's become more practical of late." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, yes, practicality, the mask often worn by those forced to accept the unacceptable." Julian's jaw twitched. He looked about to say more when the butler entered. "Beg pardon, sir," he said to Poirot. "A gentleman has arrived, rather insistently asking for you." Poirot rose immediately, brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve. "A gentleman, you say? How curious." In the hallway stood a man in a grey overcoat, his expression severe and impatient. He removed his hat and stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, my name is Lionel Finch. I'm a solicitor in London. I believe you've been investigating the murder of my client, Sir Alister Channing." "Indeed," Poirot said, offering his hand. "Your name is familiar." Finch produced a small envelope from his breast pocket. This was meant to be delivered to you. Sir Alistair had instructed it to be posted should any irregularity occur following his final visit here. Poirot took the envelope and opened it with the precision of a surgeon. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper, the handwriting unmistakable, sharp, slanted, and deliberate. To Monsieur Hercule Poirot, should the shadows of doubt gather around me, trust no one, not even those who seem most loyal. I have made arrangements. The truth is hidden where the past was buried. Seek the ledger beneath the bench by the greenhouse. Poirot's brow furrowed. The past was buried. He folded the letter neatly and turned to Hastings. My friend, it appears, we are not quite finished after all. The greenhouse stood in the southern garden of Enderby Hall, its glass walls misted with condensation. Though the estate's gardeners had long since abandoned it to the creeping tendrils of ivy and disuse, the structure remained intact, a forgotten monument to Sir Alistair's wife, Eleanor, who had once devoted hours to tending roses no one else could see bloom. Poirot stepped inside, followed closely by Hastings and Julian, who insisted on accompanying them. It's been locked since before his death, Julian said, his voice low. Poirot ran his gloved fingers along the side wall until he reached a long wooden bench, partially buried beneath a cloth and several empty pots. Ah, voilà! He knelt with difficulty, grumbling at his knees, and pried loose a narrow board beneath the bench. Hastings helped, brushing away years of grime and cobwebs. Beneath the hollow was a small leather-bound ledger, wrapped tightly in oilskin. Poirot turned the book over. It was labelled simply Channing Estate, Private Disbursements. Julian peered over their shoulders. What is that? Poirot didn't answer immediately. He opened the ledger and began flipping through pages. Rows and rows of payments, all dated and precise. But it wasn't the names that mattered. It was the dates. The pages stopped abruptly 6 months ago. Then came several loose letters tucked between the pages. Poirot pulled them free, scanning the ink swiftly. A whistle escaped his lips. Bon Dieu! What? Hastings asked. Poirot held up one letter. It seems Dr. Malvern was not acting alone. Julian paled. What do you mean? Sir Alistair had uncovered a pattern. Funds, substantial ones, redirected from his personal accounts under forged authorizations. His ledger outlines several payments to shell companies tied to someone within his household. He turned the letter toward Julian. The handwriting matches yours, monsieur. Julian stumbled back a step. There must be some mistake. But Poirot's eyes were glinting now. I do not think so. This ledger was hidden. Sir Alistair was preparing to expose you, but he waited. Perhaps to spare Cicely, or perhaps he suspected even more. Julian's voice was faint. I didn't kill him. I believe you, Poirot said gently. You are a thief, monsieur, but not a murderer. Your crime was betrayal. Hers was something darker. He turned to Hastings. We must deliver this to Inspector Barnes. The web, mon ami, is larger than we first believed. As they exited the greenhouse, the cold wind curled through the trees like an exhale. Poirot tightened his scarf and glanced over his shoulder once more at the crumbling glass house. There are always echoes, he murmured, and some never truly fade. Chapter 8. Shadows from the greenhouse, the hush that fell over Enderby. All after Poirot's discovery was different than before. A quieter silence, but somehow heavier. Not the silence of mourning or mystery, but the kind that came after a truth was spoken aloud and could not be taken back. The private disbursement ledger, now safely in the hands of Inspector Barnes, had cracked the case wide open again. What had seemed like a straightforward crime of emotion had turned into something far more elaborate, tinged not just with jealousy or grief, but premeditated deceit, misdirection, and years of financial abuse. Poirot, ever alert to the subtleties of character, sensed that the web of complicity reached deeper than anyone had dared imagine. That evening, Poirot requested a meeting in the library with every member of the household still present. His invitation, elegantly written on the thick stationery of Enderby Hall, bore no emotion, but carried weight. No one declined. The library had once been the domain of Sir Alistair. Walls lined with leather-bound books and old law texts, a globe in the corner, and a fireplace that burned dutifully, even when no one was cold. On this night it crackled and flared, the shadows dancing over the strained expressions of those gathered. Poirot stood at the hearth, Hastings at his side, and folded his hands with purpose. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I thank you all for coming. I have asked you here not to reopen wounds, but to close them with truth." Julian sat stiffly, jaw set, his hands folded too neatly on his knee. Cicely, pale and unreadable, leaned back in a leather armchair, lips pursed, eyes narrowed. Inspector Barnes stood silently by the door, arms crossed, while Beatrice Symes hovered behind the settee, chewing her thumbnail in anxiety. Only one person had not been summoned. Dr. Malvern, who now occupied a quiet cell at the county station, her confession confined to motive, but not method. Poirot gestured toward the desk, where the ledger now rested in a sealed evidence bag. "This book reveals years of covert financial misappropriation from Sir Alistair's estate. Money siphoned off through fabricated authorizations, shell companies, and manipulated accounts. Delicately orchestrated theft." Julian's throat twitched. The handwriting matched yours, Monsieur Symes. Poirot continued gently. "Though I believe you began with reluctance." Julian swallowed. Yes, he was going to cut me off entirely. Said I was lazy, entitled. I didn't think I was stealing. I convinced myself I deserved it. But I never meant for him to be hurt." Poirot raised a hand. "Your crime is despicable, yes, but not fatal. There is more. I told you all once, murder is rarely simple. It is not an act, but a culmination. And now we must address the culmination." A pause. The fireplace hissed softly. Poirot's eyes fell on Cicely. "You have been remarkably composed throughout these proceedings, madam. I have watched your behavior, your silences, and I have wondered, how does a daughter of noble birth, once engaged to a man of principle, remain untouched by the chaos of the last days?" Cicely's lips barely moved. "I've always been composed. It's how I was raised." "Yes," Poirot said, "but not even the best upbringing can suppress guilt forever." She stiffened. "You see," Poirot said, stepping closer, "Sir Alistair discovered the theft. But he also discovered something more dangerous. A deception that strikes not at money but identity. He turned to Barnes. The final 2 pages of the ledger, what did they contain? Barnes unfolded a copy. Bank records. They linked Julian's false authorizations to a firm in Vienna. But there was another document as well, a birth certificate. Julian frowned. Birth certificate. Poirot let the weight of the words settle before he spoke again. Cicely, or should I say, Clara Merton. A gasp escaped Beatrice. Julian stood up. Cicely's face remained a mask. Poirot continued. You are not Cicely Channing, daughter of Sir Alister and Lady Eleanor. The real Cicely died in a boating accident while abroad, an incident quickly buried under the weight of grief and embarrassment. Your father, in a moment of madness, brought you, an orphan with similar features, into the fold. Perhaps it was a favour to an old friend, perhaps something darker. But you, Clara Merton, became Cicely. Hastings blurted, Good Lord! But why wouldn't anyone say? Poirot raised a finger. Because the inheritance required legitimacy, and Sir Alister was prepared to undo it. That is what the documents in the ledger proved. His intent to dissolve the false identity legally and amend his will. Julian staggered back into the armchair, eyes wide. You were never Cicely? Clara to Cicely turned her head toward him. I was everything she could have been, better even. Poirot's voice dropped quiet now. Sir Alister confronted you. Perhaps he offered silence in exchange for disappearance. But you had invested too much in the lie. You could not walk away. Barnes stepped forward. Are you saying she killed him? No, Poirot said calmly. She didn't need to. She had already arranged it. All eyes turned to him. Poirot resumed. Dr. Malvern acted out of anger, yes, but that anger was fed, stoked, directed. She was shown the ledger pages anonymously, pushed toward the idea that Alister had betrayed her trust, removed her from the will, and threatened her position. It was Clara, Cicely, who mailed her the pages using Julian's handwriting. She knew Malvern's temper, her history, her unresolved grief, and she used it. Poirot's words now fell like pins in the silence. She manipulated a killer. She made her accomplice act without ever raising her own hand. It is a form of murder, mes amis. Bloodless, but lethal nonetheless. Clara stood, her eyes like ice. And what will you do, Monsieur Poirot? Arrest me for being clever? Barnes stepped forward. That's enough. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. Clara did not flinch as 2 officers entered and took her arms. She merely looked at Poirot, a smirk forming. Even Cicely would have admired that speech. Poirot said nothing as she was led away. Later that night, Hastings and Poirot stood beneath the great oaks outside the hall. The wind had picked up, brushing leaves into curls of movement across the gravel. I can't believe it, Hastings muttered. She fooled everyone. Non, Poirot replied softly. Not everyone. Sir Alister saw the truth. He saw it too late, perhaps. But he saw it. He looked up at the stars, hands folded behind his back. You see, Hastings, identity is a fragile thing. We think it is set, defined by birth or title. But in reality, it is no more than a performance for those around us. Sometimes we play it too well. They turned back toward the house, the great windows still glowing faintly. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "And now, Enderby Hall." Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "And now, Enderby Hall may rest." Chapter 9. A Legacy in Ashes. The early morning fog lingered like a veil over Enderby Hall, a thick blanket of silence that seemed to mirror the tension still hanging in the air. Poirot, ever diligent in his routines, had already begun his day with a brisk walk around the grounds. The estate was eerily still, the grand house appearing as though it were holding its breath, waiting for the final thread of the mystery to be unraveled. As Poirot made his way back to the house, his thoughts were consumed by the case. The arrest of Clara Merton, the woman who had assumed the life of another, had been swift, but Poirot knew that the final layers of deception were far from peeled back. The motives, the alliances, and the manner in which the crime had been orchestrated still gnawed at him. He was not one to let go of a mystery until he was certain every piece had been put into place. Inside, Hastings was already sipping his coffee in the drawing-room, his brow furrowed in thought. "Ah, Hastings," Poirot said as he entered. "You look as though the fog had settled within you as well." Hastings chuckled, though his mind was far from light. "I can't stop thinking about Clara. She seemed so composed, even in the face of everything. How did we all miss it?" Poirot took his seat opposite Hastings, his hands folded carefully before him. It is easy to be deceived when we look only at the surface. We were too quick to focus on the personal aspects of the crime, on jealousy, betrayal, grief. But the real deception lay beneath the facade. The true question was not who killed Sir Alistair, but why someone would go to such great lengths to preserve a false identity. Hastings nodded slowly. "But Poirot, she wasn't acting alone. Dr. Malvern, she's the one who killed him, wasn't she?" Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze turning inward. Dr. Malvern was the instrument of death, yes, but she was manipulated, directed by a mastermind. Clara, Cicely, had carefully orchestrated everything. She used the doctor's rage to eliminate a problem she could no longer ignore. The ledger was the key, but the true weapon was psychological manipulation. "But why?" Hastings pressed, leaning forward. "Why did Clara go so far? It seems like such a drastic step just for the inheritance." Poirot's lips curled into a small, enigmatic smile. "Ah, Hastings, it was never just about the inheritance. The money was the means, not the end. What Clara truly desired was control. Sir Alistair's estate, his life, his family. She wanted to dominate every aspect of it. Becoming Cicely was just the beginning. But as the years passed, the house, the name, the fortune, it all became hers to lose. She could not afford to let it slip away." "But why go so far to involve Dr. Malvern?" Hastings asked, still confused. "Why not just deal with it herself?" Poirot's smile faded, and he leaned back in his chair. "Because Clara was clever, Hastings, but she was not without her flaws. She needed an ally, someone who could execute the plan, someone who would take the fall if necessary. And Dr. Malvern, with her history of emotional instability and unresolved grievances, was the perfect pawn." Hastings's face brightened in understanding. "I see. So, the murder was a means to an end, a way to clear the final obstacle standing in her way of total control." "Exactly." Poirot confirmed, his voice steady. Clara used Dr. Malvern's unbalanced state, her anger, to create the perfect storm. She ensured that the doctor believed the death was justifiable, an act of vengeance for a betrayal. But the question remains, Hastings said. What now? Clara's been arrested, but what about the rest of it? The inheritance, the estate. Poirot stood, his eyes reflecting the weight of the question. The estate is for all intents and purposes still under investigation. But there is one more thing, something I have not yet shared with you, mon ami. Hastings looked up, intrigued. What's that? Poirot walked toward the window, his gaze distant, as if searching for something beyond the fog. While I was inspecting the ledger, I noticed something curious. One name kept appearing over and over again, an unknown figure who had connections to Clara's fabricated identity. A man named Charles Redding. His name was linked to several of the shell companies, and in every instance his involvement was covered in shadows. I suspect he was more than just a financial accomplice. Redding, but we've never heard of him, Hastings said, his brow furrowing. Who is he? Poirot turned back to face Hastings. That, mon ami, is what I intend to find out. If Redding was involved in these financial machinations, it is likely that his role goes far deeper than simple money laundering. Perhaps he was a willing partner, or perhaps he was another pawn in Clara's game. Either way, he must be located. Hastings's eyes widened. Do you think he's still out there? Poirot nodded slowly. I have no doubt that he is, and if he is still involved in this web of lies, I fear there may be more to uncover. The sound of a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Barnes entered, his face grim. Poirot, Hastings, we've just received some troubling news, Barnes said, holding up a telegram. Charles Redding has disappeared. He's gone, and no one knows where he's headed. We've checked every lead, but there's no sign of him. Poirot's expression grew serious. This changes everything. He walked over to Barnes, taking the telegram and studying it carefully. Tell me, Inspector, was Redding in contact with anyone recently? Barnes hesitated before replying. There was mention of someone in the telegram, but it's unclear. A woman named Elise Dupont. We have no further details. Poirot's eyes gleamed with a new intensity. Elise Dupont. The name is unfamiliar, but it may be the missing link. We must find her before Redding does something he cannot undo. Barnes nodded. We're already tracing leads on Dupont. But if Redding is on the move, we need to act quickly. Poirot turned back to Hastings, his voice calm but filled with purpose. It appears, Hastings, that our investigation is far from over. We have yet to uncover all the players in this game. That evening, as the sky darkened with the promise of rain, Poirot stood at the threshold of Enderby Hall, his coat collar turned up against the chill. The fog had thickened, and the distant sound of a carriage could be heard faintly. Redding will not be allowed to slip away so easily, Poirot muttered to himself, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the mist. No, mon ami, the game is not yet finished. He turned, his mind already racing with possibilities, his little grey cells working tirelessly as the shadows around the hall seemed to deepen. Chapter 10. The final gamble. The night had fallen heavily, cloaking Enderby Hall in an unsettling quiet. The air felt dense with expectation, as though the estate itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to fall into place. Poirot stood before the grand fireplace in the drawing-room, his eyes scanning the room with methodical precision. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance on the walls like ghosts of secrets long buried. He had been expecting this moment for days, perhaps even longer. There was no such thing as coincidence in Poirot's world, only intricate patterns waiting to be uncovered, and this last lead, the elusive Charles Redding, was the final thread that would unravel the entire web of deception. "Do you know, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice breaking the silence, "I have always believed that the final reveal of a mystery is not just about finding the truth. It is about understanding the people involved, understanding their desires, their fears, their weaknesses." Hastings, who had been standing by the window, glanced over at Poirot, his face pale with the weight of the mystery that had consumed them for days. "It seems like we're at the end of this one, Poirot. But I still don't fully understand how it all fits together. What is it about Redding that makes him so important?" Poirot's eyes narrowed with a subtle gleam, and he took a slow step toward Hastings. "Redding, mon ami, is not merely important because of his connection to Clara and the estate. No, he is significant because he is the one who thought he could control the game. He believed he could play it without being caught, without realizing that in doing so, he became the most dangerous player of all." Hastings furrowed his brow. "But we still don't know who he really is, what his motive is." Poirot smiled, but it was a smile filled with a knowing sadness. "That, my friend, is the most delicate part of the mystery. Redding was never about money. He was about power. But power, as we know, is fleeting. It was always about getting someone to trust him, to place faith in him so that he could control not just their actions, but their lives. You see, he and Clara, no Cicely, had a shared ambition. But unlike Clara, Redding was patient. He knew the moment would come when everything could fall into place, when his chance would arrive." Hastings remained silent, watching Poirot's every movement. He could sense that his friend was reaching the final conclusions, the ones that would tie everything together. But there was still one piece missing, one final question hanging in the air. "Where is he now?" Hastings asked, the question hanging in the space between them. Poirot turned to face him fully, the firelight flickering in his sharp eyes. "That, Hastings, is what we must discover. He is close. I can feel it." Just as Poirot spoke, the door to the drawing-room opened and Inspector Barnes entered. His face was grim, his usually composed demeanor now tinged with an unsettling urgency. "Poirot, Hastings, we've located Charles Redding," Barnes said, his voice clipped. "But we believe he's preparing to leave the country. He's on his way to the docks." Poirot's face remained unreadable, but a spark of determination flickered in his eyes. "He will not escape. No one who has played such a game can simply walk away. Hastings, it is time." The trip to the docks was swift, the carriage rattling over the uneven roads, as Poirot, Hastings, and Barnes made their way toward the harbour. The rain had begun to fall in heavy sheets, soaking the cobblestones and turning the world outside into a blur of water and shadow. Poirot's mind, however, was as clear as ever. His little grey cells were in motion, working through the details that had brought them to this moment. Charles Redding was a man of ambition, yes, but he had also made one critical mistake. He had underestimated Poirot. When they reached the docks, Poirot instructed Barnes and Hastings to remain outside the warehouse where Redding had been traced. He would go in alone, as he always did when the situation demanded it. He trusted his own mind, his own instincts. It was not a matter of physical confrontation. It was a matter of outwitting his opponent, of ensuring that the truth could not be avoided. With careful steps, Poirot made his way through the darkened warehouse, his eyes adjusting to the dim light as he moved past stacks of crates and barrels. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay. He could hear the distant sound of the sea, the waves crashing against the shore. But there was no time for such distractions. He had a job to do. As he moved deeper into the warehouse, Poirot spotted a shadow near the far corner, standing by a stack of crates. The figure was tall, his features obscured by the low light, but Poirot knew immediately who it was. Charles Redding. Poirot's voice rang out, calm yet firm. The figure stiffened at the sound of Poirot's voice, then slowly turned. Redding's face, once concealed in the darkness, came into view. His eyes were wild, betraying the panic that had begun to set in. "So, you have found me, Hercule Poirot," Redding said, his voice low, almost mocking. Poirot's gaze remained steady, unflinching. "It was never a question of finding you, mon ami. It was a matter of understanding you." Redding's hand tightened around a small satchel at his side, and Poirot could see the fear in his eyes, despite his bravado. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Redding," Poirot continued, his voice colder now. "And it is a game you will not win. You believed you could escape, but you overlooked one very important thing. You underestimated